Hello, friends. I've got your headlines, some really great clips, and an awesome conversation with a first-time guest, a scholar who studies gender issues and sports, and real smart, written a new book. Dr. Anna Baeth joins me for the first time. That conversation starts at 32 minutes into today's show. It is Wednesday. I'm in upstate New York, where I'm visiting my parents. Mom is still in the hospital after her car accident with Dad on January 7th. They were broadsided by a pickup truck in upstate New York, and Mom's still in the hospital with a bunch of broken bones, but she is doing great. I'm so happy to report I saw her last night, and she is in great spirits, continues to make jokes and celebrate in gratitude that it wasn't worse, as she told me yesterday. So Mom and Dad are hanging in there. It is not easy. It's going to be a long road, doing all I can to help out, but it's obviously a lot, and I'm sure you have your own obstacles, adversity, and bag of rocks, and it just seems like this is such a weird time. I don't know. Maybe it's this winter storm that dumped more snow on us than it seems like for years. Maybe it's the storm from the Gestapo in Minneapolis and around the country, and all of the horrific things that have been done by us and in our name by this horrible, horrible man and those who support him. Or maybe it's any number of other issues that you're struggling with or dealing with. I just want to remind you, as I remind myself every morning, part of what I do here when I'm talking out loud and saying things is reminding myself to do my best to be grateful. It's just such a consistent and promising place for me to come back to, no matter what seems to be happening in my life. I just am trying my best to practice gratitude in all of the ways that I can. And I just wanted to say that I am grateful for so many of you who are listening to this show. I generally jump right into it with the headlines and the clips, but from time to time I like to take a point of personal privilege and leave a message for you and talk directly to folks who are listening, which I guess is what I'm always doing, but just in terms of reminding each other what we have and what we're grateful for. And nobody knows what's coming. Uncertainty is a real son of a bitch, and we all know about that. Or maybe we don't, because I feel like maybe I just learned about how much chaos and stress uncertainty creates. Pema Chodron says that embracing uncertainty is essential for enlightenment and urges us to abandon the pursuit of what is solid ground and try to find freedom by relaxing into the inherent instability of life. She says, give up hope of getting solid ground under your feet. The middle way is our birthright between certain and uncertain. She says, the root of suffering is resisting the certainty that no matter what the circumstances, uncertainty is all we truly have. And it's so true. It's just such a constant truth. And I think it's real important to remind myself and others of that whenever the opportunity arises. And also, I want to reread Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's post from a couple of days ago, which I keep seemingly also coming back to, where she wrote, cynics and defeatists share the same story as authoritarians do, that nothing is worth trying. The conclusion is foregone. Hope is naive, and attempts to resist are too small or futile. Don't listen to them. Do not give up. Try. A better world is possible. We will win. We must. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think it's hard to hold on to for fear of the next failure, which is inevitable in terms of our movement, in terms of trying to get back to some kind of healthier place in this country, some kind of less corrupt authoritarian government. I don't know exactly what is in our future, and that is the whole point. And that is what I wanted to say. That, and just how grateful I am to have so many of you in my life. Many of you have gotten to meet each other and connect with each other through our Hangouts or Discord or our live events, or you've just visited each other when passing through town, and it's wonderful. And so many of you have done so much for me. My gratitude for your generosity and your kindness will never be able to be, I think, articulately and honestly, authentically stated to you. But so many of you have done so much for me. Just in the last couple of days, I've been talking to many of my friends. And my friend Mark Lipsky, who just reached out and said, hey, I got some airline points I can't use. And he got me and Julia flights to Arizona, where I'm going to take her for a week in February. Very excited about that. And guess what? I'm staying with Mindy and Mike, who are other listeners and supporters and very good friends who I've made through this show. And then I'm on these text chains with so many of you just talking and laughing. And it's a wonderful community, and I am so grateful for it. And I want to just thank you for supporting me and hoping that we can continue to keep it going. Tell your friends, invite people to join us. And I hope to see you at tomorrow night's Hangout. And now let's get to those headlines and the clip show, which is very good today. A lot of very inspiring, indignant, progressive people, I think, that we're going to hear from on today's clip show. But first, the headlines, and let's start with breaking last night. You may have seen on social media, or you probably already read it, that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar was in Minnesota doing a town hall, and she was attacked by a guy sitting in the front row, 55-year-old white man, and he had a syringe with something in it that he squirted on her. And we've probably seen this, and all I want to say about it is it's horrific and horrifying, and we know why he was incited to do it, because our violent leader calls upon people basically to attack any number of hundreds of Americans, including those serving in Congress. No one maybe more than her. And just worth mentioning that you probably, if you saw the video, if you didn't, Ilhan Omar goes back at him. And later was quoted, she didn't end the press conference, she went back to it. She's like, I've been through an actual war in Somalia. And she went with fist raised at him, but it was actually terrifying, but also inspiring. And she's tough and not backing down, and I loved it. I mean, I hated it, but her response. And obviously, in other news, we head to all things Minneapolis, where a whole bunch of mainstream reporters and independent journalists have gone. And it seems like at this point it's almost overcovered. And there are so many other issues to talk about. Obviously, our orange authoritarian tyrant went to Iowa yesterday. He made comments to reporters following him around, insulted a reporter, mentioned outside his helicopter that you shouldn't be bringing guns, which probably doesn't matter to the Second Amendment crowd. Apparently is mostly a bunch of cult followers. So if Donald Trump wants to fuck your wife, that's all right. He can certainly take your gun too, because he can do anything he wants. But in other news related to it, his border czar and Mr. Potato Head, corrupt Tom Homan, who was the architect of Trump 1's family separation policy, is now overseeing the immigration crackdown in Minnesota. Somebody referred to that as switching Bavino for Tom Homan is like shitting your pants and then changing your shirt, which gave me a chuckle. The governor's office, Tim Walz in Minnesota, said that he and the border czar had agreed, Tom Homan, to work toward the state's goals of reducing federal forces there and conducting an impartial investigation into the killings of Preddy and Renee Good. So, hey, if that's a negotiation, if that's what he gets, that's a pretty good start for Tim Walz, I think. We need an impartial investigation, obviously. A judge has ordered the head of ICE to appear in court to explain why he should not be in contempt. That's a pretty important and interesting story. You might want to read that one. A federal judge also temporarily blocked the deportation of this 5-year-old boy and his father who were detained in a Minneapolis suburb last week. And there's a lot more to say about what's going on in Minneapolis. But in terms of other news, billions of dollars of federal assistance for disaster-struck communities has been delayed, sometimes by months, by a new FEMA rule, which is that any expenditure of $100,000 or more must be approved by the Office of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who nobody likes, nobody wants gone. She has to approve every expense of $100,000. Would that talk about an inefficient government? But $17 billion of federal disaster funds has received the extra layer of review. I'm sure she has not done that. But what a disaster. Yesterday, the White House revoked a rule requiring additional staff in nursing homes after industry executives donated to our corrupt leaders' super PAC. New York Times has a new investigation out that I guess we didn't need, but it is a journalistic endeavor, that their social media posts are echoing white supremacist messaging. A flurry of posts from the White House, Department of Labor, Department of Homeland Security, and more have included images, slogans, and even a song used by the white nationalist right. And while you may have seen this being reported separately, you maybe not have seen it all in one place. And so Evan Gorelick at the New York Times has a good piece on that where he says the posts have referred to neo-Nazi literature, ethnic cleansing, and QAnon conspiracies, mused about deporting nearly a third of the U.S. population, and promoted lyrics from an anthem bellowed by far-right militants of the Proud Boys. Their authors are not on society's fringe. They are in the offices of the White House and departments of Homeland Security and Labor using official government accounts. So go read that one if you didn't know about it and share it with everybody in your network. Let's see. What else can I tell you? A person was shot in an incident involving U.S. Border Patrol in Arizona on Tuesday, according to Pima County Sheriff's Department. That was breaking yesterday. I haven't followed up on that. A new study by the Center for Strategic and International Studies has found a staggering number of killed or wounded in the conflict that Russia started in Ukraine, the Russian invasion. The number of Russian and Ukrainian troops, they say, killed, wounded, or missing during nearly 4 years of war is on track to reach 2 million by this spring, according to a new study. A stunning toll as Russia's assault on Ukraine grinds on. Crazy. What? How could that possibly be? Here is another case worth watching. Families of 2 Trinidadian nationals killed in a Trump regime boat strike last October have now sued the federal government, calling the attack a war crime and part of an unprecedented and manifestly unlawful U.S. military campaign. Definitely a case worth watching. And you know how our dear leader is constantly saying that he has made deals where he hasn't, and the other negotiating partner in the deal is like, wait, what? Well, apparently he threatened to increase tariffs on South Korean exports because the country has not ratified a trade deal with the United States quickly enough. In a post on Truth Social, Gasolini faulted Korea's National Assembly for not approving a trade deal that he had reached with the president of South Korea on July 30th. So there you have it. This is pretty crazy. Pediatricians and the CDC will someday be on the same page again, but it's not today. The American Academy of Pediatrics is reminding children to be vaccinated against 18 diseases, more than the U.S. government directs after its overhaul its schedule. The doctors group, which released its recommendations Monday, kept its guidance largely unchanged. I think I already reported this, but worth saying again, although yesterday they did have the regime did come out with criticism from a doctor who's a pediatric cardiologist now in charge, I think, of vaccines, questioning the polio vaccine. That's right. Yeah, go look it up. Also, a federal judge in Oregon dismissed a Justice Department lawsuit seeking Oregon's unredacted voter rolls on Monday, and another setback to wide-ranging efforts by Alexander Scamilton to get detailed voter data from states so they can fuck us. And news that a unit of U.S. of ICE would be present during upcoming winter games has set off concern and confusion in Italy, where people have expressed outrage at the inclusion of an agency that dominated headlines for leading the regime's immigration crackdown. Why is ICE accompanying U.S. athletes in the Italian games? It's confusing. I don't know much about it, but I mentioned the headline. I don't read all of these stories. There would never be enough time, but I do want to mention them and follow up on them and give you the heads up on all of that's happening. So let's see. Finally, prize-winning composer Philip Glass has called off a scheduled world premiere at the Kennedy Center of Symphony about Abraham Lincoln. That's what he was going to perform. That's the latest of the wave of cancellations since General Patton ousted the previous leadership. Philip Glass's Symphony No. 15, Lincoln, was to have been led by Grammy Award-winning conductor Karen Kamnasek for performances on June 12th and 30th, but he canceled. Everybody's canceling. And bravo. Very patriotic. All right. Well, those are the headlines that I've gathered for you. Let's get to those clips, and there's a lot of good ones today. I want to start with the District Attorney of Philadelphia, who is a real tough guy. His name is Larry Krasner, and here is what he had to say at a press conference in Philadelphia yesterday. Let's start there.
This is a small bunch of wannabe Nazis. That's what they are. In a country of 350 million, we outnumber them. And as long as we stick to our values, protect our rights, make it very clear that homicide is not okay just because you are a federal officer, if we do that, this will end differently. I have one final promise to you, and that is that I, along with a bunch of other state prosecutors, keep your eye on this, you'll be hearing more about it tomorrow, but I, along with a bunch of other state prosecutors, are rallying around Mary Moriarty, who is the prosecutor in Minneapolis. I know for a fact she is working 24/7 to make sure that there is justice coming out of two, what appear to be, by all indications, criminal homicides and what appears to be, by all indications, a criminal shooting of someone in the leg. I want you to understand that just as you have come together, there are state prosecutors coming together right now to make sure that people understand there will be accountability. There will be accountability now. There will be accountability in the future. There will be accountability after Trump is out of office. If we have to hunt you down the way they hunted down Nazis for decades, we will find your identities. We will find you. We will achieve justice, and we will do so under the Constitution and the laws of the United States. This is a small bunch of wannabe Nazis. That's what they are. In a country of 350 million, we outnumber them. And as long as we stick to our values, protect our rights, make it very clear that homicide is not okay just because you are a federal officer, if we do that, this will end differently. I have one final promise to you, and that is that I, along with a bunch of other state prosecutors, keep your eye on this, you'll be hearing more about it tomorrow, but I, along with a bunch of other state prosecutors, are rallying around Mary Moriarty, who is the prosecutor in Minneapolis. I know for a fact she is working 24/7 to make sure that there is justice coming out of two, what appear to be, by all indications, criminal homicides and what appears to be, by all indications, a criminal shooting of someone in the leg. I want you to understand that just as you have come together, there are state prosecutors coming together right now to make sure that people understand there will be accountability. There will be accountability now. There will be accountability in the future. There will be accountability after Trump is out of office. If we have to hunt you down the way they hunted down Nazis for decades, we will find your identities. We will find you. We will achieve justice, and we will do so under the Constitution and the laws of the United States.
Wow, tough talk from Philadelphia DA Larry Krasner. Thought that was pretty good. Wanted to share that. Also wanted to just mention Tom Tillis. He's an outgoing Republican senator, but he briefly called for Kristi Noem's firing, and so have so many other Democrats that you've probably heard from as well. But here's that brief clip from Tom Tillis.
Stephen Miller never fails to live up to my expectations of incompetence.
Why do you think he should be fired?
I'm going to leave that up to the president. I can tell you, if I were president, neither one of them would be in Washington right now.
All right, that's Senator Tom Tillis. How courageous of him. And now let's go to one of the NBA's biggest star athletes, ball players, who is also an immigrant. He is the San Antonio Spurs' Victor Wembanyama. They call him Wemby. You know, I'm a huge NBA fan. I do like basketball in the NBA, but I don't really know a lot of these guys as well as many of you do, and you make fun of me for it. Anyway, I thought this was pretty good. I like to hear all these players and the league and the players' union, I believe, speaking out against ICE and these horrible, horrible tactics that our federal government is using. Here's Wemby.
Every day I wake up and see the news and I'm horrified. I think that it's crazy that some people might make it seem like, or make it sound like it's acceptable. The murder of civilians is acceptable, you know.
Kind of a big factor in this, that people have that fear that if they speak openly about an injustice they see, there can be repercussions.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's terrible. It's I know I'm a foreigner. You know, I live in this country. And I am concerned for sure.
All right. Good stuff. He's speaking for a lot of us, I think. in that clip right there. Now let's head to the Sundance Film Fest, which is going on, I guess, right now. New documentary, When a Witness Recants, where Ta-Nehisi Coates, I think, is one of the producers of. So he sat down with an LA Times reporter for an interview, along with some of the other producers, I believe, writers of the documentary. And I thought this was really great. This is Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's there promoting When a Witness Recants, which I'm definitely looking forward to seeing and always looking forward to hearing from this very influential, inspiring, brilliant guy.
You say the law is above the law. And I think that's something that a lot of people are feeling right now with the images that we're seeing from Minnesota and from elsewhere in the country. How do you make sense of these images that we're seeing around the country right now?
One of the messages of this film is that there's a world that most Americans live in which the police are an image of trust and morality and upstandingness. And we would like to live in that world too. Some of us even thought we did. You know what I mean? But I think for most of America, they spend many years believing that. And I think what has happened really over the past 15 years or so, honestly, since you got the camera phone, is people are very gradually being disabused of that fact. And so, it begins with seeing it happen to black people. It begins with seeing it happen to black men and black women right in front of you. And some white folks see that. And they decide that, they don't want to live in a world where things like that happen. Mm-hmm. And then they decide they're going to stand up, and they quickly realize that the law can be turned against them too. Mm. And that is, I don't rejoice in any of that. But I do come back to the fact that what you're seeing play out across the country is connected to this story. Trump wanted to put the Central Park Five to death. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are the same people. These are not, different people. They're bullies. And, when they get, the tools of the state and the violence of the state, they use it upon whoever. And that's this story.
Well said. As always, Ta-Nehisi Coates, tough to top. But here is Robert Garcia. He's a congressman. He was on MSNBC yesterday, and I don't think it needs any more setup.
Even if you remove Bovino, even if you remove honestly, even if you remove Tom Homan, does it matter so long as Stephen Miller is in place and has the ear of the president?
There is no one in the administration, not a cabinet secretary, not the vice president, that has more influence and has done more damage to this country than Stephen Miller. And we should be very clear about it, especially when it comes to immigration policy and the way that we're actually treating people in this country. And so, look, we're going to work to impeach Kristi Noem because she is in the position. But Stephen Miller should understand that he is, in our opinion, as a caucus and certainly on the Oversight Committee, he is the number one person in charge of Trump's horrific immigration policy, attacking U.S. citizens, deporting innocent people, going after folks that have done nothing wrong in this country. And I've said this a bunch of times. I've said it to our caucus at meetings. I've said it on this network and others, that from the oversight perspective, when we have subpoena power, which we don't have it now because we're in the minority, when we have subpoena power, the top person on our list, number one on the Oversight Committee's list, who will be receiving a subpoena on day one, will be Stephen Miller. He has a lot to answer for, or what damage he's caused in this country.
Yeah, Congressman Robert Garcia on point, as he usually is. And another guy who's real smart, I love watching and listening and reading, is Chris Hayes, who I'm going to try to get on the show for his new book, Siren Call, I think it's called. Anyway, Chris Hayes sat down with his friend Seth Meyers and Late Night with Seth Meyers, and I just thought he hit it out of the park and the way that he frames this, as he often does. So here you go. Inspiring, I think.
But I do want to get your take on the tragic events in Minneapolis this weekend.
I mean, I don't have any insights or novel observations other than it's horrific. And I think that there is a profound moral revulsion that has begun to kind of ripple through society outward and outward in these sort of circles that emanate from what we've seen in Minneapolis, both with Renee Good and with Mr. Preddy's death. And I think that we're in a situation right now where people who've not been checked in are waking up to the kind of abject moral depravity that is what this administration is at this moment. And I also think that, like, the courage and testimony and witness and organization of the people of Minneapolis is astoundingly inspiring.
Yeah. You know, it's also, you know, I can't speak to how lucky we are that they're all, and obviously we've seen what an incredible risk it is even to hold up a camera to ICE officials, right, with Alex Preddy. But without these cameras, like, the narrative would be totally run by this administration that we know will actually get out ahead of the video and tell a story that is patently, provably false.
I mean, it's almost, I think the only adjective to describe the way that they have approached this is sociopathic. For Stephen Miller to say this man was a would-be assassin who wanted to massacre federal officials,
yeah,
and to tell all of us that that's obviously not true. And it's not obviously not true because you're a liberal, or it's obviously not true because you don't like Donald Trump. It's just obviously not true. Anyone with eyes to see. And I think, you know, part of what I've been thinking about and this is such a horrible tragedy. I mean, there's been 3 homicides, 3 basically shooting deaths in Minneapolis all year. One of them was a crime, traditional, and 2 of them are by ICE agents.
Yeah.
Okay? Part of what I think is getting to people here is that they think they can control reality. And in the end, it's almost this sort of elemental battle that you see time and time again with sort of would-be authoritarian regimes about whether reality can emerge triumphant over this kind of regime of lies. And it took tremendous courage for the people that have recorded. I mean, that's what, you know, Alex Preddy was doing when he was murdered.
Yep.
And I say that advisedly. And it's what the woman in the pink coat was doing. It's what Renee Good's wife did. And it's taken incredible courage for people to do this, but it's so vital that we have that documentation.
Yes, indeed. Good stuff. Chris Hayes, who was in Minneapolis live last night for his show All In on MS Now. Here is the former host of Late Night on CBS, The Late Show, rather. It's David Letterman. I don't know where this clip is from, but I just love Letterman, and I love him bashing his former employer.
What about those idiots at CBS? The CBS News is a wreck. It's just gone. Mm-hmm. CBS News for decades, going back to World War II, before World War II, they would be, Ed Murrow would be broadcasting the Blitz of London from the rooftop of buildings in London for CBS Radio. And it was that mentality that drove the integrity of CBS News that has been trampled on, pissed on, and eviscerated by these idiots that have taken it over. Yep. And I'm at a point now where it really is hurting my feelings because I'm sick and tired of people saying, oh, wait till those midterms. Kids, we're far downstream of the midterms having any effect on this.
Yeah, Letterman. So good. And speaking of CBS, here is some comedy from Stephen Colbert, the current and final host of The Late Show on CBS.
Apparently, Trump learned that violent and masked goons are not crowd pleasers, and he learned that from his most trusted advisor, the TV. Reportedly, over the weekend, working from the Oval Office, Trump watched as footage of the shooting of Alex Preddy played on repeat from Minneapolis. As one insider described the situation, it's and POTUS knew he needed to it. And Trump knows better than anybody, if you don't quick enough, you could end up with an Eric. So, his big move, I'm sorry to use bad words like Eric. His big move in beginning the sending in Trump's border czar and love child of Shrek and Mrs. Potato Head, Tom Homan. Just to refresh your memory, though it sounds like I don't need to, Tom Homan is not cool. He was the architect of Trump's family separation policy, and in 2024, he allegedly accepted $50,000 from an undercover FBI agent that was hidden in a bag from the Mediterranean fast casual restaurant Cava. So downside, terrorizing families and maybe taking bribes. Upside, he brought hummus. Now that Holman's in, the old guard is out, because reportedly, in response to the outrage over Alex Preddy's murder, the head Border Patrol thug in Minnesota, Greg Bovino, has lost his job as commander-at-large. Yeah. Another reminder, Greg Bovino has been accused of using racial profiling to round up Hispanic men, women, and children, created an enforcement strategy where officers jump out of unmarked rental vans to ambush immigrant day laborers, and he admitted to lying to justify deploying tear gas against protesters. As one source described his whole deal, he's a cowboy, and it was a mess. Yeah, just like the John Bon Jovi song.
I'm a cowboy, that's why I tear gas your dad, but also I tear gas your mom.
Yes, they made tear gassing your mom and dad funny on CBS. Good stuff by Colbert, who, by the way, announced the date of his final episode in May. I don't know what it is, but I just read that was announced. So if you wanted to get tickets, you probably can't. All right. Let's get to my guests, shall we? Those are the clips, those are the headlines, and the message. I am so grateful that you are here. Patreon.com/PeteDominic. If you like what we're doing here to support my work, it's the only way I get paid. That's right. We don't do ads here. We just do subscriptions. So please sign up now, patreon.com. You can always pay more if you want. $5 is the entry fee. There are no tiers. Once you're in, you get to be part of our community, get invited to our hangouts and our events, and connect with each other and so much more. So please join us. All right, let's get to my guest today. She is a real smart woman who has a whole bunch of degrees. A Ph.D. in kinesiology via sports sociology from the University of Minnesota. I talked to her about living in Minneapolis for 6 years. She has a master's in exercise and sports studies. She has a bachelor's in sociology, anthropology, and educational studies. She's been a coach, a professor, a athlete, a collaborator, and she says those are all roles that have deepened her commitment to building inclusive communities. And I want to talk to anybody who's got that background, much less who's written this, co-authored this new book, which I think is really interesting, which at first when they pitched me, I was like, do I really want to talk about trans athletes? I feel like that's kind of a distraction. And when you hear me mention the title of the book, you might be like, I'm not sure if I want to listen to this interview, which many of you have said you often think, but then when you do, you're grateful that you did. And I promise you, this one is one of those. The new book is Fair Game, Trans Athletes and the Future of Sports. And my guest is Dr. Anna Baeth. She's a researcher, a field hockey coach, public speaker, advocate for gender inclusion in sport, and a professor at the prestigious Smith College in Massachusetts. And I'm very happy to have her join me for the first time. I really like this conversation. She's very thoughtful. I hope you do too. Let's do it. Okay, I've got Dr. Anna Baeth, who is one of the co-authors of this really interesting and important book, joining me right now for the first time. And I am very excited to talk to you and to learn from you. I've already learned so much in reading the book and researching you. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I just got to ask you, though, off the top, you earned, is that how you say it? I wouldn't know because I didn't earn any degrees, but you earned a Ph.D. at the University of Minnesota, where you also lived and coached and worked for 6 years. And I just wanted to ask you, I know like every other American, you're paying close attention to what's going on in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I wanted to just ask you about your reactions to it, what your experience is like there, the people, the community of Minneapolis, and how you're seeing them respond to the horror.
Yeah, all eyes are on Minneapolis right now. And in some ways, I'm thankful because the communities in the Twin Cities I have found are incredibly engaged, incredibly community-oriented. And I think it's showing in a lot of the counter movements that are happening there. I'm a Quaker as well. So a lot of my intel is coming from the Quaker community. And what I'm hearing a lot of is that we're seeing something on the news, but what's happening on the ground is very different. There's a lot of peaceful protesting happening. It's been very effective. There's a lot more to be said. I was in Minneapolis when George Floyd was murdered. He was murdered about a mile from my house. And the parallels are just...
Philando Castile was murdered there as well. And Also, of course, there were 2 Minnesota legislators. There was a horrible shooting. I believe at a church in Minnesota has gone through it. And it's just hard because, I don't know, I always think it's hokey when anybody is, but they name their community and then say how strong they are. I lived in New York on 9/11 and everybody with COVID and everything, but it's like everybody says that, but it does seem like the Minnesota, the Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin City community, they're just, the stereotype is that they're kind people, that they're nice people, that they support each other. And that seems to be what we're all seeing play out right now. Fair to say?
I think that they are generally kind people, yes. And I also think that they know what it means to organize, as we saw with George Floyd and as we're seeing now. And I also think, given the climate, like snow in the middle of winter, the fact that this is happening to winter people, I find very curious. Minnesotans, they are hardy. I love it.
Yeah. And you've lived and worked in a couple different, you grew up, I think, in Maryland. You live now, work in a college in Massachusetts. So you've seen a lot of different cultures in this country. And obviously you're a scholar and studying psychology and behavior and everything that goes into your work. So it's really interesting to get your perspective on, well, anything, and including obviously your expertise. Let's talk about that first before we get specifically to the book, which is fascinating and important. You are a critical feminist scholar, it says in your bio. We've heard of critical race theory. There's also critical feminist theory. And I'm scared. It's scaring me. It makes me feel uncomfortable. What is it?
Essentially, where critical feminist scholars say we need to think about how gender is oriented in the world. And that's basically it. I think maybe the phrasing of it makes it sound like I'm a hyper-feminist. No, I'm just really curious about how gender plays out in our interactions.
I don't even know what that would mean or entail, being this or that, but labels get us lost. All of the labels get us lost. You know that as well as anybody. But when you talk about being curious about how gender orients itself in the world, so many people, certainly on the right, they're never scholars who would say this. I guess maybe some of them, maybe like Jordan Peterson or somebody, they would say that majors like the one that you got your Ph.D. in and write and read are like useless. They're useless for life. They don't prepare young people for anything, all this gender theory and race theory. And I suppose you could argue art or something. I don't know. What would you say to ignorant people who say that something like feminist studies or gender theory is not an important field of research for people to live and work in the way you have your whole career? And I'm sorry for even asking you this, but I do want to know how people should combat that.
It's funny. This reminds me of a question that I asked one of my college coaches. In my first year of college, I went to a liberal arts school that very much valued liberal arts. And I would say that is not the type of environment I grew up in. So I showed up at this school and I'm playing sports. And I remember going to my coach and saying, yeah, okay, these classes are great, whatever, I'm learning, but I'm not learning anything practical. How is this useful? My dad grew up in a logging family in Montana, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And she said, it's not about what you're learning per se. It's about how you're thinking. It's about how you approach the world and think about the world. That's what we're trying to teach you. And the idea here is we want you to just be curious about the world, to ask big questions about what's happening in the world and what it means. And for me, that certainly served me well. But I would say, sure, I'm a critical feminist scholar. I'm also a sports coach, right? You can have a career. You could do other things. And I think the bottom line is, and something that I talk a lot about as I think about this book, is we need to be more curious as a people about each other and about what's happening in the world.
Yes. And
curiosity is an orientation, and we have to learn it.
And when it comes to gender and race and religion and other kind of immutable characteristics, it just seems normal to be curious, especially about the ones that you don't identify as. Like when I became the father of daughters, I did a whole bunch of research right away. And I still learn so much from them just being their dad or just being married to a woman, or I didn't know anything about menopause until I still don't really know that much about it, but I didn't really think about it until like my mid 40s. And that's just gender. And that's just me being a man being curious about women. When it comes to sexual orientation or gender identity or certainly race. Like, it would seem that we should be learning from people who study it and who identify as it. It doesn't seem like that should be that controversial, but man, is it. We're in our lanes and our tribes and our algorithms, but it seems pretty obvious that's exactly what we should be doing, learning about each other, which is why I'm here to talk with you about. That's why I'm interested in talking to you and talking about your book. But say more, just a little bit more about why it's important in these times to learn about gender, to learn about sexual orientation, and to learn, yes, about trans issues, because that's very new for most of us. I think it's fair to say all of it is.
Yeah, and I should say, so...
And feel free to just, if I say anything that's super ignorant, just make fun of me. Like, I'm fine with that. That's what we do here.
No, I would never. Listen, this is about getting curious, right? And I have to say, okay, so I identify cisgender, which means the sex I was assigned at birth is female. I identify as a woman, right? So those align. And I have to say that I really didn't know a lot about this at all before 5 years ago. So I was finishing my Ph.D. I got hired.
Anything transgender related, transgender issues?
Anything trans related. I had heard a bit about it. I had met a couple of folks who were trans, but especially when it came to sport, not my forte. I was a coach.
Sport is, though. That's what's interesting. Gender and sport is your forte, but so you're the perfect person to really book to dig into it and do the research, but not transgender-based sport.
So I did my PhD. I was studying women in sport, how we can keep more women in sport, particularly sport leadership. And I was looking for a job, and I was hired by an LGBTQ rights organization. And within 6 months of being hired, all of a sudden, there were all of these bans being put forward around trans athletes. And as the head of research for this organization, I started getting a lot of calls, people asking me, like, what am I supposed to think about this? What do we do about it? Or alternatively, people telling me what to think and what to do about it. And I have to say that 5 years ago, if you had asked my opinion on trans women in sport, I would have said, I don't know what to think about that. That feels like a really slippery slope. And then,
go ahead.
Trans women being included in women's sport.
Yep.
And then I started getting all these questions, and I realized I had to do my homework. So I spent 5 years studying this topic and formed my own thoughts and opinions on it, a lot of which are in the book. A lot of the data from the book is based on that. But the point is, of course, people are behind. This just started happening in the news in a very big way in the last few years. So, yeah, let's all continue to learn together.
Just before we get to trans athletes in general, what have you learned just about the transgender community, specifically in terms of the idea of it being something that's biological and body dysmorphia and thinking you're in the wrong body versus what experts refer to as something called like social contagion, meaning you're born that way and you always knew, or things happening in culture and for any number of reasons, people change the way that they identify because they feel more comfortable or any number of reasons. How do you understand the difference there, and does it matter?
I have to say, I'm a nerd, right? So let's start there.
Yeah,
so
17 degrees.
But I find it interesting that you asked this because I was actually really curious about this. And so I went and looked at the numbers because I'm like, okay, so if this is a contagion, wouldn't it stand to reason that in the last several years, there would be more and more people coming out or identifying as transgender, non-binary? Really, that isn't the case. When we look at the numbers, when we look at surveys, and the media is misleading here because there have been a few reports put out in the last few years that say there are more and more people coming out as trans and more kids identifying this way. That's actually not true. Really, what's happening is the ways that we're surveying people are changing. So it used to be the case that we would just say, hey, do you identify as transgender? As a transgender woman who was maybe raised as a man, or a trans man who was raised as a woman. Now, the surveying has shifted. So we're asking people, hey, does that gender work for you, more or less? And so more people are responding with no, even though maybe they don't identify fully as a trans woman or a trans man. And again, I think the point is, if it were a contagion, if the idea were there and then suddenly people were like, oh, yeah, okay, I want to be getting on that bandwagon, the numbers would look different than they do.
I learned long ago from a researcher, and I think we should all be humble enough to admit that we're not researchers. That requires a degree, and you have to learn how to do research. And doing a Google search is not research, and you don't know how to read a study, you arrogant prick. You don't know how to. You don't.
And the bottom line...
The audience, hold on, I'm not done ranting. Now, the point is, though, I learned a long time ago is that anecdotes are not the plural of data. And so all I have is an anecdote, which is to say that it feels like teens are more likely to come out as trans in a community that is more likely to be welcoming or safer. More liberal communities are more likely to have liberal teens. Again, that's just anecdotes. I could easily probably imagine that if you felt like you were in the wrong body or that you want to identify as trans, you might not do that in a community where you're going to get more likely to get rocks thrown at you by other kids, much less your parents. That's what I mean by the only anecdotal evidence about contagion, that you're more likely to have trans kids in a liberal community than a conservative community. Does that make any sense?
Hell yeah. Rant on.
I don't know if it's not that. The rant was over. I was more ranting against the people who say I did my own research, who aren't researchers, including me, versus then I just went into a thought. Sorry.
And I think part of this that we have to talk about that people aren't talking about enough, I think, is AI. And really where data is being constructed and interpreted and how that's happening. I'm not sure what else there is to say except don't trust what your Google AI tells you if you look up the question of, are more people coming out as trans?
It's actually a really interesting point I hadn't thought about. Like now more than ever, we should be relying on actual real people's voices, in this case, scholars and experts on issues, as opposed to doing our, I've always felt that way, but people think AI is making everything better, more accurate, more efficient. And I suppose you can make arguments in certain cases that it is, but I think that you make a really good point. That's why we're talking to you, who's actually conducted the research, co-written a book, and has a lot of data in it. Also interviewed how many trans athletes in this case, like lots of actual people that you spoke to for the research.
Yeah, 20 trans athletes.
Tell me more about the research that you did for your new book, Fair Game, which is fascinating. Tell me more about how you guys put this together. Trans athletes in the future of sports, by the way, the subtitle, if I didn't say it.
Yeah, the book is a combination of statistical data, just what people should know, in our opinions, that hasn't really been published yet. And it's combined with the stories of 20 trans athletes. So we put out a call to interview trans athletes. We heard from 60 folks within 2 days. People who really wanted to tell their stories. We interviewed them, put their stories in the book. But I think what's perhaps the most interesting about this is when we first wrote the book, part of why we wrote it was because we noticed that a lot of people were talking about trans athletes without talking to trans athletes.
Yeah, that was
right.
Yeah.
And one of the stats in the book talks about just how much media attention is given to trans athletes, but never actually names a trans athlete. And in fact, in 2021, if you look at all of the news put out that year, there were more conservative politicians quoted in talking about trans athletes than there were trans athletes quoted at all, talking about their own experiences, right? So who gets the stage? Who gets to have their voices heard? As we were thinking about that, we said, okay, let's introduce the world to some trans athletes. And that was the impetus for the book. But of course, we wrote the book 3 years ago, and now we're in a very different political climate than we were 3 years ago. Case in point, when we interviewed all 20 of these athletes, all 20 were competing. As of today, only 5 can legally compete. Actually, I think the number is now down to 3 can legally compete, and no athlete under the age of 30 who we interviewed for the book is competing.
So many myths to bust that you do in this book. It's one of the best reasons that everybody should read it and be knowledgeable about it. But before I get to it, my take has been for a long time, being in the trenches, certainly with the school board fights, much less just regular old activism and national media and everything. And I felt real comfortable with my point of view on all of it. I just hate that we're talking about an issue. Editorially, I choose issues on the show that impact huge groups of people, marginalized communities especially, but there are not that many trans athletes, and there are not that many trans people, trans kids in school. And yet I'm getting screamed at and fighting with people in my school over one student who wanted to play volleyball. And so I sometimes worry that I am giving too much attention to an issue that critics of the issue want to get attention to, because it drives a wedge. This issue of trans people has been an amazing winner for the right for years. I do know and have seen that the tide is turning on that. But we went from trans girls being allowed to use the bathroom in my community to trans sports. And again, one kid who played volleyball for one season. So my question to you is, this issue gets disproportionate amount of attention based on how many people are affected by it. And are we feeding into their fear and their exploitation of what can, generally speaking, are vulnerable people by talking about it too much? You guys have written a whole book about it.
This is the question, right? Don't we have bigger fish to fry? I think about this a lot in terms of two other framings. The first is, who is this impacting aside from trans athletes? Okay, so we have a book and we talk about trans athletes. We know that they make up less than 1% of the athletic population. And realistically, we're talking about half of 1%. Now, I have a strong vested interest in sport, right? And so for a long time, I would respond to the media and say, hey, if you want to have a conversation, let's talk about what really matters in sport. If we want to talk about making sport fair, then let's talk about sexual assault in sport. Let's talk about the abuses that are happening in sport. And let's talk about the reality that we are living in a pay-to-play model where only the kids and the families who can afford to participate in sport are the kids who get to have access to their bodies, like at all. So yeah, okay, sure. There are other bigger issues. But I think a lot of what I think about when I think about what's happening to trans kids is what this means for little cis girls, little cis boys, and cis women and men in our society, beyond sport and beyond gender. So there's that, and I'd be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot to unpack there. Just got to ask you a somewhat personal question, but it's your opinion here. You've been a coach of lacrosse and field hockey. I played lacrosse my whole life, which I think is awesome. Have you always coached women's teams?
I have.
You would be, and I suspect an athlete yourself, you would be like one of the most qualified people to ask the fairness question, which you cover in the book. And I think that's a really important question to talk about with all kinds of different issues when it comes to socioeconomics or economics in general. Where the fear of fairness comes from. How worried have you ever been as a player or a coach that a trans girl was going to be on your team or on the opponent's team? Is that something that you dealt with and have ever feared, and where does it come from?
No, that is not something that I'm worried about. I suppose it has come into my mind, of course, because it's all over the media. And whenever I tell people that I work in women's sport, the first question invariably is, what do you think about trans athletes?
Oh, really? They ask that right away, because women's sports has been on the rise for our generation and fascinating to watch. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and so on. But like a lot of glass ceilings broken, and yet so I have 100 other questions before I get that, but it's so topical and on people's mind that they want to know how to feel too, because your opinion matters a lot, I would imagine, on that.
I think the question though about fear and the idea of fear is a really important one. I have talked to a lot of women athletes about this topic, and we can't talk about it without talking about how much fear is involved in women's sport. So there's fear on a couple of levels. We could talk about why a lot of athletes are afraid of locker rooms in general. general and why that has been mobilized as a talking point about trans athletes. I would say that's much more about assault, policing of bodies than it is about trans. It's certainly not trans folks causing harm in locker rooms. There's been no incident of that. But also that fear is real. And I think we need to name that. And that fear is valid because the reality is for the last 100 years, different politicians, different folks have been trying to reduce women's rights in sport since we've gotten those rights, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Title IX, which, says we need to have equal access, equal funding streams to men's and women's sports, more or less, that's not exactly what it says. Most estimates are that 90% of institutions still aren't in compliance with Title IX.
Wow.
And that was passed 50 years ago. There are still fewer girls participating in sport today than there were boys participating in sport in this country in 1972 when Title IX was passed. So when we're talking about trans athletes, I just want to say it's a distraction. And what it's a distraction from is the real issues that are happening in sport and in society that are ironically related to gender in sport.
What about those people, those protesters, those advocates who fashion themselves as protectors of women who are anti-trans women playing sports? That has been particularly outraging for anybody who has been advocating for women's equality in any space, because it would seem that a lot of those people are who knows, but it would seem that a lot of them are of the political ideology that is against things like women's reproductive rights, much less pay equity or anti-domestic abuse, or aware of anything that affects women almost exclusively or a lot worse. And so now they're out there protecting women. So that's a softball for you. But to me, like, those are the ones that really trigger me the most. Like, I'm protecting women. Could you name any? Do you know any female athletes? Could you name? Serena, she's retired. I'm sorry. Name one active. Like, they aren't really protecting, in my opinion. What do you say to those people?
I think I would say, first of all, I am a woman in sport and I don't need protecting.
Thank you.
So there's that. And I wish a lot more cis women would stand up and make that more clear. I also think, to your point, if we wanted to protect women in sport, and maybe let's get away from protect, let's talk about supporting women's sport and women in sport. There are a lot of other ways to do it, a lot better ways to do it, a lot more effective ways to do it. We have bigger problems for women in sport right now than trans athletes. So let's talk about and focus our energies and resources there.
What do you say to people who are afraid of that a trans woman will hurt a woman in sport, in any kind of athletic endeavor, that men are biologically superior to women, which is, as you guys write, a simplistic and outdated assumption that ignores the complex interaction of biology, training, financial resources, and environment. You also interviewed a bunch of endocrinologists who are experts on hormones and so on too. So what do you say to those people? Listen, I'm all for all trans rights, but I don't want my girl to get hurt by a trans girl who hits the ball harder, or who, I don't know. I don't even use hypotheticals. I'm not even good at them.
Yeah, I think there are a few points to draw out there first. One is that it's very likely you're going to get hurt in sport, right? There's risk involved, right? Also, when we look at the numbers, the number of cis girls who have been harmed by trans girls on the field, on the court, according to records, 0.
If there were an example, much less two, it would be all we hear from. All we hear from is that dumb swimmer woman, because she lost, or she came in like 5th place or something. What's her name? Riley Gaines. Like, she's a superstar because of one race or something. So if in fact, as you said, there was an injury, God forbid, a video of it, it would be on a loop all day long. So that's a really interesting statistic. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. And I think it really begs the question of, what is the point of sport? And why are children participating? If you're very concerned about them being harmed, I think we have to really ask, why do we want children to participate in sport? And something I go back to, I mentioned that my dad grew up in a logging town. He was a big athlete. He insisted that I play sport as a kid. And part of why he insisted upon it is because he said, hey, listen, you've got to learn how to lose. You've got to learn that you are not always going to win. You have to learn to carry that with grace. You have to learn how to carry winning with grace as well. And you're going to have to learn how to interact with people who are not like you. Right. People who do not come from the background that you come from, people who do not have the family that you have. That is why we put you in sport. Right. And I guess it's just also so counterintuitive to me to say, actually, let's make sport less diverse. Let's actually have fewer people participating in sport. And let's ensure that the kids who are participating in sport are the ones who live in the suburbs, have the money, and have the time and resources. Right.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Your dad sounds like a real smart guy. And also teaches you work ethic, and most importantly, working with a diverse group for a goal like that. You can use that the rest of your life. What the other concern, of course, is that trans athletes outperform their cisgender peers at any level of competition. What evidence do we have for that?
I suppose the evidence is that, okay, so the International Olympic Committee has allowed trans athletes. We'll see what happens in the next few years. But prior to that, they've allowed trans athletes to participate since 2003. Since then, how many trans athletes have competed and won medals? None have won a medal. There were 2 trans women who could have participated in the Tokyo Olympics. Laurel Hubbard, she disqualified as in Olympic weightlifting before really the competition even began. And the other one was a BMX rider from the United States who was an alternate for the US team. Okay, if we're so worried about trans athletes winning, why aren't they winning? And the reality is the people who are winning at those levels are the same people who have always won.
It's always the case.
Yeah, we just, it's not that complicated. And when people talk about testosterone, right, I hear this all the time. Men have more testosterone, so they're better athletes, yada. If it were that simple, wouldn't we just test every kid for their testosterone levels and then train the kids with the most testosterone to be the best athletes? It's a no-brainer to me. That's how the sport system would be operating if it were that simple.
What about trans boys? We don't really talk about them, but someone born a girl transitioning to a boy and wanting to play on a boys football team or wrestling team or something like that. I feel like we're not as afraid of the trans boy as we are of the trans girl. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think that's because the assumption that underlines all of this is that women are not as athletically capable as men. And also, so trans boys and trans men, right, wouldn't compete.
I feel like our culture has it set up. I know I would feel far worse losing to a girl than a boy. I wouldn't care. I wouldn't allow myself to play against a girl who I knew was better than me. No, I would. I mean, all these are silly jokes, but like the truth is ego is at play and women are probably less likely to be worried. And it's a cultural paradigm to be beaten by a boy or a biological boy than boys are. I have my friend's daughter, listener of the show, shout out to Abby, is a wrestler. And there's a lot of co-ed wrestling because it's by weight class and so on as well. And I think that's probably at play too, is just ego. I don't want to lose to a girl. I mean, that even when kids are little, I used to love to watch my daughters beat boys and watch them deal with it. It's like, it was a great opportunity for them. We gave those boys a great opportunity to lose with grace to my daughters.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting point. And I get asked a lot about that too, like the patriarchy and men's egos. And I have to say, it actually just makes me so empathetic for little boys.
Yeah.
To be told, like, wow, the very worst thing that can happen to you, and we talk about this in the book, is really two things. One, you realize that you identify as a woman. Oh my God forbid. Or two, you lose to a woman, right? What are we teaching our kids in sport that those are the two greatest fears a little boy has?
Yeah.
And this is when I mentioned we need to think about how all of this is affecting not just trans athletes. That's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, it is worth mentioning, like, I could tell the difference I feel like I could tell the difference between the boy who lost to my daughter and shook her hand and was happy for her and was a good sport versus the one who's, you say you have empathy for, I do too, his face crinkles up and you see he's destroyed. And he's now, how's he going to live with this? There's a difference probably in parenting, maybe in culture, maybe it's the shows they're watching, maybe that's their siblings making fun of them or not, but there's a lot to be said for that kid, that boy who loses to a girl as a young boy or an adolescent with grace and with humility and with kindness. I'll say that. So think about that, I guess, parents. Let's talk about just though this main issue of what we should all be doing is, I think the point of what part of your book is saying and what your work is to continue to support girls and women in sports. That's the bottom line. What is the state of women's sports union today? 2026. It feels, I don't know, in our lifetime alone, I'm 50, but I just feel like I've seen so much success in so many ways and by every metric, but you're going to tell me where we're at now.
We are seeing success and we're still catching up, right? The bottom line is, and I think this is part of the fun of the book, is to say, okay, so we know that sport is problematic. Doesn't change the fact that I love sport, first of all. Let me say that. But let's get imaginative. Let's think about what this could look like. And yeah, support women's sports. We're certainly seeing an expansion of women's sports, but we're also seeing a very particular type of policing of women's bodies, right? Okay, so the WNBA is expanding. We're seeing more attention being given to, say, the U.S. women's national soccer team, mostly because they win a lot every 4 years in the Olympics.
Yeah.
That's all great. It doesn't change the fact that, first of all, women still get 2% of media coverage, sports media coverage. That jumps to about 4% during those Olympic years because of the U.S. women's national team. This is why most Americans can only name a single female athlete.
Is that right?
Yeah. So there's just, the bottom line is if you love women's sports, be a fan, invest in it, and demand that people make it more accessible. Another case in point, WNBA is expanding. Still very difficult to find it on television. Okay, there are more teams, but if I can't watch the games, what are we doing? These issues abound, right? They're in every facet of sport.
It starts, as you mentioned earlier, though, I would imagine, with opportunity to enter just as a small kid. And we all have different sets of resources, different communities, different socioeconomics, but like the barrier to entry still remains. And there are still a lot of limits for girls and women. Is that what you're saying? Like, I almost feel like I would not be surprised by a statistic that said more young 8-year-old girls are playing soccer than 8-year-old boys, or any number of like statistics like that. I feel like I would not be surprised by that. But then again, I suppose that probably breaks down based on socioeconomics a lot as well. If you live in an urban area, there's just not as much opportunities, not many fields, and many courts, and that's to begin with, much less money.
Yeah. When people ask me about this fairness question, and I said earlier, the people who are winning have always won. As little scientific data as there is about testosterone and trans athletes, there is enormous data around who wins in sport. It's people who have money and people who have access. That's it, right? I mean, it's the athletes who get training early, who have access to the best facilities and the best coaches. So for me, when people say, is it fair? If we want to make sport fair, let's make it free. That's the first step. I am way more curious about what would happen if we made sport free, who would be excelling in it, who would be thriving in it. And frankly, would little boys and little girls have very different experiences? I think so. Let's talk about what matters. We got to talk about money.
Yeah. It always seems to boil down to economics, socioeconomics. I'm way over time, but I have 8 million more questions. I guess I have to ask you, though. I know because I prepped for this conversation. There's a lot we didn't cover, so maybe you can pick something that you think would be interesting, a myth to bust, or any other fact that you found or were surprised by yourself when researching and writing the book. What else did we not cover that you might want to mention?
Yeah. So in the book, we talk about 4 different myths, but I think the broader point is, and I was actually a little surprised by this, each of the myths is way more harmful than trans athletes, right? So each of the myths we bust is about, is it fair for trans athletes to participate? Is it safe? Yada. All of those myths, all of those narratives that we're hearing about trans athletes are way more harmful for all athletes than competing against or with trans athletes.
Give me an example.
We did a policy analysis of different states. And we found that in states that have protective policies for trans athletes, so states where trans girls could participate or could participate with particular parameters, cis girls in those states report being healthier, happier, having more confidence in sport, and are more likely to stay in sport. Right? So it's the curb cutting effect. If you have healthy sporting systems where there are good policies to protect kids and train coaches, turns out all kids thrive. So by saying, okay, we're going to ban trans athletes and we're going to put those policies in place, we're actually harming the experience of cis girls, which goes directly against the myth.
Fascinating. All of it is. It's really important. One last question. You mentioned this, and I really don't know what's going on here and a little ashamed about it, but sexual harassment and abuse against women athletes, you say, remains really widespread. It creates this unsafe, hostile environment that push women out of sports. We hear about the high-profile cases that I guess you're not surprised by: coaches, doctors, people who have access, build trust, and then abuse, assault, harass. What are we talking about in terms of the sexual harassment and abuse against women athletes that we might not see in the headlines? The trends.
If I'm honest, I think the biggest one and one of the most difficult ones to name is how girls are expected to look and operate in the world, first in sport and beyond sport. We know that girls are twice as likely to leave sport by the age of 14 than boys. And the biggest factor that they talk about is feeling uncomfortable being viewed in sport, right? Having other people looking at their bodies or being in their bodies because they've been told that there is something wrong with their bodies. Now, that is a little esoteric, but I think the bottom line is when we're talking about policing trans athletes, we're talking about who is feminine enough, who fits a very particular mold of what we expect a young girl athlete, woman athlete to look like. And that goes much deeper than even relationships with people in positions of power in sport.
Yeah, that's fascinating and really important and something to continue to discuss and learn about as a parent, as a teacher, as a coach. And you can by getting this book and by listening to Dr. Anna Baeth, who we've just gotten a really great opportunity to do. This is so fascinating. I am really appreciative of your work and of your time talking to me today. Let's do it again. Let's continue this conversation. Obviously, it's not going anywhere, and I hope the book gets a lot of attention, and I hope you guys get to spread the word a lot more because your research is super valuable. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. And if you ever want to flip the script, I would love to interview you about being a dad of little girls.
Done.
Your own experiences with bodies, sports. My dad had 3 sisters, and he would always say, that's a lot of toilet paper. So we could talk about it.
Yeah, no. All right. Well, that is where we're going to end that conversation. We went off on another tangent right there, and then became personal things that I didn't want to have on the record here for nothing, no big deal, but all good. It was just really, really a great conversation. Dr. Anna Baeth, I hope that you'll go look at the book, potentially buy it, share it with your friends, tell them about it. Fair game, trans athletes and the future of sports. I know there's a lot happening in our world and your world, but I want to stay focused on experts whenever I can on policies and issues that matter and impact us. So I certainly think this one has and does. I learned a lot from that. Hope you did as well. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Sorry it was up a little late. Hopefully you appreciated it still. It was still relevant with the news and so on. Never know. All right, that's all. I will talk to you tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you at the Thursday night hangout as well. John Carroll writes all of my music and our music and performs it. JohnCarroll.org, and look at the links on the show notes of everyday show notes for other creators in our community. StandUpWithPete.com. For the helpers, remember to be grateful for any number of things. Gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. I'm grateful for you. Thanks for being here.
Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.